You are listening to the Real Men Feel Show with your hosts Andy Grant and Appio Hunter. Real Men Feel is all about encouraging men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been taught, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to opening up discussions that most men aren't having, but you certainly don't need to be a man to join us. The Real Men Feel podcast is produced live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern for your growth and enjoyment. You can find more information about the Real Men Feel movement at realmenfeel.org. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe on iTunes by visiting realmenfeel.org/iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at realmenfeel.org and at facebook.com/realmenfeelshow. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. This is a weekly program, and your comments, feedback, and participation are welcome during the live show and anytime in the Facebook group, on Twitter, or at realmenfeel.org. Now, let's get into this week's show. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Real Men Feel. I am your host, Andy Grant. This is episode 70, and this is one of those programs where we are being driven by current events. We do not have any official guests, an official agenda, but with the unfolding sexual harassment scandal around Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, and then the viral rush of so many women coming forward with the hashtag #MeToo, just posting that, just saying that they've experienced sexual harassment, anything from harassment and improper advances on them, indecent proposals, all the way up through rape. It's the talk of the town, for lack of a better word. So we're going to have an open discussion on that tonight. With me, as always, is my friend and co-host, Appio Hunter.
Hey, Andy. I'm really glad that we're going to be tackling this tonight because, I think it's like a discussion that we've never talked about here on Real Men Feel, and it's something that's been talked about for so many years. And now, as you mentioned, this big explosion that's taking place. It's good timing for us to just dive into the waters.
Right. Yeah, that's. I'm glad. Again, when the idea of the show is to have conversations with what's showing up in the world, so that you can be part of it by listening or being part of the live show, or taking something that we shared and running with it with your own family, with your friends, with your circle of influencers. Right. So our circle of influencers includes one Lori Grant. So say hello, Lori.
Hello, Lori.
We're going to go really old-fashioned. So Lori is here. Lori is here for most shows, but I really wanted to introduce. She's my wife. So she is a real woman who feels. And, so this is our best attempt to have as well-rounded a discussion as we can. We did put the call out and invited anyone that wants to join us can be part of the show. So maybe more will join us as we go along. But so Harvey Weinstein, big Hollywood producer, I believe it's over 30 women now have come forward with and accused him of sexual harassment. Anything from being overly flirtatious up through and including rape so far. And then that has resulted in more men being called out, more men in position of power in the entertainment industry, mostly. And I had heard of Harvey. I'm in the Screen Actors Guild. Just from doing background work on movies that are shot in Massachusetts. But I've always been interested in filmmaking and follow it. So I knew him, and I knew he had this reputation of being an asshole, like one of the meanest people in anywhere. And just if you got on his bad side, you were in trouble. And that's just from being a movie fan. I know I did not hear about his sexual harassment. And really, it's beyond sexual harassment. What he's being charged with is just being a sexual predator. So Appio, when you first heard this story and as it got bigger and bigger, what was your first impressions? Did you have initial reactions at all?
I did have an initial reaction, and it's like, isn't it interesting how we see somebody who was quite obviously a sexual predator and rather proud of the fact get elected to the highest office in the land, and yet somebody who is pretty much I would say at the same level as that, if not more so, then have what really should have happened during the presidential campaign now finally happening with somebody else who was in a position of great power, who abused that power. And now it's everything is coming back. I mean, the law of karma is definitely playing out. And it's happening with, compound interest. But my initial visceral reaction, to be completely honest, was one of disappointment. It was one of disappointment. It was one of sadness. It was one of, it's like, wow, how unfortunate that here's somebody who has brought so much joy to the world in the form of many of the movies that he was, that he had a direct hand in either creating or shepherding into the world. And on the backside, there's like this really, really, really dark thing that was going on. And it just made me so sad and at the same time, be reminded of how we tend to segment things as human beings. I'm not going to use the label hypocrisy or double standards or anything like that, although they came to my mind. It's that we just seem to be very much aware, it just segments certain things, and we get outraged when it's convenient, and we justify when it's not convenient. And I think all of this is very much a representation of what's going on in our society as a whole.
And Lori, what was your initial reaction and feelings as this story was blowing up?
I wasn't surprised. Men in power. It goes hand in hand. I think if you talk to the women of the world, I think we're seeing it, with just the hashtag #MeToo, that men in power abuse it. And the easiest people to abuse it are women, because we cover it up. We justify you doing it. And that's the whole point of the Me Too, is to say no more. You need a job. You have an option. You go along with it, or you lose your job. And the people in power run it. We went through it with Roger Ailes. You saw Bill O'Reilly. You see, I think sometimes the liberals would like to say it's only the conservative men who do that, right? We saw Donald Trump do it. And
Bill Cosby.
Right, Bill Cosby.
Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton.
For each one of the men that do it, think about how many women had to come forward before the other men believed it.
Yeah, indeed.
Think about that. One woman comes out and says something. She's a lunatic. She's making it up. She just wants money. Blah, 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 right? Whatever it is. No one ever just believes her.
Mm-hmm.
No one. So when you say
something.
Yeah, there's always like this,
ulterior motive.
You should actually be telling the truth. What does she have to gain from it? Right? So Courtney Love, 12 years ago, I read this, right? Earlier today. Courtney Love, 12 years ago, on the red carpet, said never go to a party that Harvey Weinstein invites you to at the Ritz Hotel, in his room. And what happened to her? No one believed her. And she got kicked out of the CAA, right? The creative whatever agency she was a part of. Mm-hmm. They booted her. Okay? And no one believed her because she was on drugs and alcohol. And somebody smartly responded, oh, maybe she was on drugs and alcohol because she was trying to forget about all the abuse that she's gone through in her life.
Yeah. When I first heard the details of Harvey and his answering the door in his bathrobe and saying, hey, wouldn't you like to give me a massage? I thought it was funny. I just thought it was so ridiculous. Well, what an ass. This is like a bad porn movie this guy's been watching. But then hearing about all the women and some famous women, some big actresses and models that in that situation didn't feel empowered enough to say, no, you're a loser, goodbye. They were 20 years old, needing that first job, needing that big Miramax movie, right? So they went along, they gave the massage, and hearing accounts of him like chasing people naked and blocking their exit. It went from silly and what a funny asshole to, wow, this guy really is sick, and he is this predator. He's on the attack to a level that I just had no idea.
And what's really unfortunate is that he reinforced the cliche of the casting couch.
Right. But it's bigger than him. So he might have brought it to light, but the truth is it happens in every job at every age. My first job, I was 16, my very first day on the job, I was working at a pizza joint, like the local one in town, right, that everybody goes to. The girl who was working behind the counter with me, as she was training me, leaned over to me and whispered quietly, "Never go into the walk-in fridge when so-and-so is around."
Wow.
Okay? I was 16. She might have been 17. You know, I mean, so what happened to her that she had to tell me that I wasn't on the job an hour, and she was telling me that. I never walked into the refrigerator with him around, by the way. Never. Okay? Because you didn't know. And I will say, like 2 months later, the owner of the place was giving me shots of Ouzo for New Year's. Okay? I was 16.
Oh, gosh. Wow.
Right? So you know things aren't. Now, it happens, like at the time, I didn't think much of it, right? Like no one grabbed me, no one did anything. But there was, you know, looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that maybe wasn't so cool, right? So it happens. I mean, in my other jobs, I certainly went through that because I was working in a computer room in a bank in the 1980s, so it was just starting though, like the IT side of things, and it was very male dominated. And I mean, I had a boss that every Monday when I walked into work, my boss asked me if I had sex over the weekend.
Wow.
Every Monday. That's sexual harassment.
So was that acceptable? Like, what did you answer? Did it bother you? Like,
you're an asshole, and I would walk away. But he did it to everyone. You know, I wasn't special. He did it to all of us. I mean, every single one of us, he treated that way. There was back then, right? That was 1982, 1983. We had an HR department. There was no such thing as sexual harassment. There wasn't someone to go complain. Like, it was years and years later before that became the norm. Like, you could go and actually talk to somebody. I mean, you could really go and complain, but you ended up losing your job.
Right.
What happened was all the guys were like, what's the big deal? So you ended up being the one without a job. That's why people never said anything. I don't think it's a lot different today, sadly. I think
isn't.
Places to go for it, but I still think overall you end up losing your job, or you get transferred, or you get pegged as the problem person, and you don't move up the corporate ladder. And I think that's why women still don't say anything, because it's such an issue around who's in charge. Because unless the owner of the company like puts out zero tolerance and sticks to it, nobody else you don't have a shot. Because again, he doesn't do that to anybody else. I've never witnessed it. Since
this whole attitude, and before we started recording, I said, years ago it was more accepted, and now it's not accepted as much anymore. And Laura, you really responded to that notion of it used to be accepted.
Yeah, no, it was never accepted. It was just that there was literally no one to go complain to, because it was all men. Like, you couldn't, like, I could go to HR and say something and they'd go, well, we'll talk to the boss and see. But if it's your boss, who do you?
What happens?
And if the next, like, my boss's boss used to say, hey, run up to the cafe and get me a coffee, would you? So if that's the person they're going to report his actions to, what are the odds that it would be, that it would be stopped?
Right. And that's, I think
They didn't think anything of it. It was normal for them, but it was still freaking harassment and abuse for us.
That speaks a lot to what's going on and why it's still so pervasive, because in the higher levels of management at most companies, it still is dominated by men. And when you have a bunch of, it doesn't matter whether they're gay or straight, but it's predominantly straight men, that quote unquote locker room talk, that type of stuff is so normal, they honestly do not think of it as being out of the ordinary. And so there's nobody there to call attention to it. And so when you have all of, if there is more women there who can speak without that fear of repercussion, then yes, the conversation can change. Not to mention the fact that people can feel safer about saying no.
So is sexual harassment such a part of American culture that it can't be going away? If so many people see it as normal, is there a problem?
There is a problem. So it's very much like how Black Lives Matter works. We need white people to acknowledge that there's white privilege in order to make changes. Mm-hmm. We need men to realize that it's not normal what they talk about, that in jest, like those jokes, like all the little rape jokes, I remember hearing, women can't be raped with their skirt up and with a man's pants down and a woman's skirt up. She can never be raped, right? Because she could get up and run away is the concept, right? So, because I could see, Andy, your total look of like, I don't understand that.
Right.
Again, I'm married to you. I was raised by a mom. You're like, what do you mean?
Right. So this was like a comment that used to get made all the time, basically blaming the victim once again. And that's how it always is for this, is women get blamed for men's actions. The verbiage around it is that way. A woman was raped, not a man raped a woman. Right. He did the rape. It's always she was raped. She's the victim of domestic violence. There's no mention of him in those statements. So until we start really saying, no, a man did this, and that the jokes, the cat calls, the comments, the locker room talk, until you men start calling one another out when you're doing it from the get-go, then the locker room talk stops. Like the idea that this locker room talk, you're denigrating and you're just objectifying women. And as soon as you guys all think it's okay in the locker room, it's okay outside of the locker room. Exactly. Because ultimately that's how you feel.
I have to jump in here really quick because I need to say that as a man, I have been in positions where I can say something. Unfortunately, it needs to be other straight men who call out other straight men on the floor and call them out and say, this is not acceptable. Because as a gay man, of course, I was grouped into the other. I was the one who was excluded as well. And so I was never in that position to be able to call people out.
I'd say it's our job, no matter who we are, to call it out.
I agree.
But men have to call out straight. Men have to call it out as well. It can't just be women calling it out, because men will just turn around and say, "Oh, you're just overreacting. Get the joke. Get over."
That's a real thing. Because all right, I'm a white heterosexual American male. I am sure I have sexually harassed women without meaning to, without realizing it. Mm-hmm. But I also know when I was younger and stupider that I was young and stupid. And I intentionally harassed women. Like 6th and 7th grade, I was the asshole kid that was snapping bras and grabbing boobs. So the bullies and the tough guys, they would think I'm one of them, right? I'll go pick on this girl so that you guys don't pick on me, or it'll make you guys laugh. But again, as a man here today, I don't know what sexual harassment is. when is it? You can't joke like locker room talk. Like if it's guys with guys, like, well, that chick's really hot. Is that harassment?
It's not sexual harassment, that because you're not saying it to her, but what you're doing is you're objectifying the woman and you're making her less than human. So then maybe not you, but somebody else goes out and now you get the wolf whistle, you get the cat call, because they're not human. We're not human. You walk down the street, hey baby, want to have a good night, right? Like, really? Like, has that ever worked in the history of mankind? Has it ever worked?
Yeah. I've seen it work. I've seen some women say, they like that to happen. They like getting that attention. But again, so that's where I'm like, is the line, verbiage, or if the one says, hey, shut up, and like, oh, fine. But, is it pushing it beyond when someone else says, no, that's enough? And I think a lot of guys don't know either. They don't know what, like Woody Allen got in trouble. He said, we don't want it to be so that you can't whistle at someone at work. Well, even that, like, I don't think, whistling at someone in the office space does seem ridiculous to me.
Right.
But I know lots of people that are in relationships that met at work.
Right.
And so it took that, hey, want to go out tonight? Hey,
So asking someone out on a date is very different from maybe somebody walking up and that little pat on the ass, a little, a glance down at the chest, like all the things that are not appropriate. The
physical stuff is obvious. I think the average man gets that.
At how much went on. You'd be surprised how much goes on.
Yes.
The little, like, walking by and brushing up against you and, oh, excuse me. And there's a lot of little things that, you realize, you're just like, oh, right? Like, I mean, I can recall many a times. So it's, and I was raised with 5 brothers. So I want to put that out there. So I was very accustomed to hearing things. And I sadly was very accustomed to letting it ride. Like, that was the norm, that talk, that stuff, no big deal. But the truth is, it just keeps perpetuating the whole situation. And it sounds like, oh, it would be great if they could all just talk like that in the locker room. What's the big deal? But the big deal is it's kind of icky. Because you really, like, basically, nothing about the person. It's like, she's hot and I want to hit her. And I don't mean that physical, like hit, like a violent hit. You guys know, right? I would hit that, right? So that statement, right? Maybe not the worst thing in the world, except that the more it goes on, exactly what happened with Donald Trump. He made those comments, and half the freaking people, including women, said it was just locker room talk. So locker room talk becomes actions.
Yep.
Because the more you do it, the more it becomes approved of. And the same thing, right? How many women came out and said, he definitely did that to me, but no one will believe them. Because men in power, for some reason, and this goes for women as well, we don't believe them. It's like, where's the proof? Right? Like, which is absurd.
So this kind of goes back to a level of white male privilege. The man is believed, and you've got to prove it. And
right, you have to have all the tons of proof. And if someone is harassing you, right? Like we saw what happened, right? When last year when the woman was raped and she was intoxicated and she was unconscious, and people are like, well, what did she expect? That's the response, right? So we battle it on so many levels, because we are ultimately consistently held responsible for a man's crappy actions.
So women are objectified by every level of our society and culture.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not just Western culture either. Every culture.
Right.
Every culture is like that. And some are far worse than others. I mean, look in the Islamic world, how women essentially have to cover up. It wasn't so much, if you look at pictures of women in the Islamic world 50 years ago, they weren't all wearing hijabs or anything like that. More and more, it's like you have to cover up because you're responsible for the fact that I can't control myself as a male, for my sexual impulses.
And
it's the same with Mike Pence.
Right.
He won't go anywhere without his wife because he's a man. He can't control his penis.
Right.
Like, I know. Is that true?
And you can go all the way down to the elementary school and the junior highs and the high schools. The dress codes are so much stronger for women because the boys can't control themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we are taught from the get-go, dress appropriately so that they can handle it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everything around it everything around women's existence, sadly, has been to make sure that you guys are all safe.
Yeah.
Right? And then when you don't act like that, when you aren't good, then we're responsible for that behavior because we drank too much, we dressed inappropriately, we said the wrong thing, we flirted, we went out on the date and had drinks, we actually trusted you, whatever it is. We're ultimately, what did you do, right? Like, think back with Mike Tyson, right? The girl that he raped. Well, what was she doing in his hotel room? Well, maybe she just went back for a freaking drink and she said no, and that wasn't enough. And so what happened? She got blamed because she had the audacity to go back to his room, but maybe not want to have sex.
Right. So men are just these reactionary, uncontrollable beasts, and women you really have the power, but we act like you have no power, and then we give you the power just in the sake of it's your fault, and so we can blame you.
Right. I mean, you have all the power, right? The patriarchy has the power, right? I mean, in this society, for sure.
Right. But again, in these sexual relations, we act. The myth is that men are powerless when the female form presents itself.
Right. Yeah. So, you carry out.
Right. Harassment is in our genes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you just have these urges that you can't possibly control, right? And that goes all the way back, right? Like, I mean, I can remember as a kid, right? You better be careful because they can't control themselves. Like women, we have this massive amount of control over our physical urges, right? It's like, no, we're just not assholes. We don't go, oh, and I'm not saying that there are some women that will force. And I'm not saying that for 1 second, that does not go on. But the majority of the issue is not that. The majority of the issue is it's powerful men or, someone that's one level up above you.
So just someone more powerful than the female's position somewhere. So
right.
One thing I'm noticing in all the big public cases at Fox News, in politics, in all the media, it's very old men. It's all these men in their 70s. So that made me think like, oh, so is this something that is dying off with a generation? Are the younger generations, are they more open?
No. In fact, we'll use the example of Uber's ex-CEO, Larry Kalanick. He's technically a millennial. And he, just if you read all of the reports, of course, I wasn't there present. I can't say that, yes, he was responsible. But according to all of the reports that have come out, it's like the culture of sexual harassment that existed at Uber started at the top and was fostered and in some ways even encouraged by visits to escort bars in Asia and memos that were circulated about consensual sex between adults at holiday parties and things like that. So it's a lot of it does boil down to that privileged white nerd culture. In fact, not long ago, I was listening to I can't remember whether it was which podcast it was. It's either Hidden Brain or TED Radio. I think it was Hidden Brain about the hookup culture. And hookup culture on college campuses is hyper heterosexual, almost entirely privileged white men who really love this hookup culture and you see that, it's like there are certain segments of society where it's almost like encouraged and considered to be part of that rite of passage, and almost part of being that part of that particular segment of society. And so, people, even younger generations, if they come from that, and if that is just part of their lives, then they're not immune to it at all. But in the general sense, I would say that younger generations are far less tolerant of that type of behavior.
So is that because of education at the elementary school, at the high school level? Are people being taught that the stereotypical rape culture isn't the way to go, and that a man can choose something differently, or what possibly can turn this around?
Talked about much more often today.
Yes, I think that's it.
Like sexual crimes were never talked about, right? It was always whispered. It was women that were raped or attacked. There was so much shame with it, right? It was always this very private thing. So the fact that we can talk about it and we don't have to be ashamed, and like the people who should be feeling shame are the people that are doing the attacking, not the people that are being attacked. In any level, any molestation of any kind, right? The more verbal we are, the more we bring it to light, the more it can be talked about, and people can start to realize how wrong it is. So I think on that level, I think it's much more open. I think people are much more aware. I think the rape culture thing, I think that's still, we have a long ways to go with that. Yeah. We see it, the woman that was raped behind the dumpster, the guy was caught, right? He was caught having sex with this woman while she was unconscious. And the judge gave him 6 months because he didn't want it to impact his life too much.
Because it came from that particular segment of society.
Right, he was the nice white. Right, he was the nice white, wealthy kid. They posted about his swim times because he was a big swimmer, and then her story was, well, she was drunk at a party. So they sort of like made him the victim instead of her. And that's rape culture. Yeah. That's rape culture, right? Like, oh, the poor boy, and that's sort of what women were taught. Like, we don't want to upset them when they do something wrong. Did we misinterpret it? I read this fabulous article today about how she never came forward because she thought she may have misinterpreted his actions. The man who, they were partying and she didn't really want to have sex and kept saying no, but then he did it anyway. And she's like, well, maybe I just didn't say it, I wasn't forceful enough, whatever it was, and sort of excusing that behavior. When another man flashed her, well, maybe he didn't really do it on purpose. I don't really know. And so it's that whole, we constantly, because no one else believes us, we stop believing ourselves when something so obvious happens. And it's scary because we don't come forward. And that's why so many people, you see all the Me Too's, but you don't see the women who won't write it because they're not sure if it really happened, or they're so uncomfortable admitting that it happened or telling anyone else that they're not posting it.
And it's definitely, as a man watching this, it seems like there's a safety numbers that, like, the bravest person has to say, this happened to me.
Right.
And much like so many subjects that we talk about here each show, Appio, once someone breaks the silence about any issue, others feel empowered and can feel that courage to speak up. But I get it. Like, if a woman accuses a man, hours after something's happened, she's just not believed, and no, you're after something. And if she waits 10 weeks, months, years, well, why'd she wait? Well, she must be making it up now. Why are you bringing it up now? So
yeah, exactly.
There's no winning time.
Absolutely. And I'm going to throw a whole wrinkle into this whole thing to kind of put men into a position, straight men in particular, into a position of really thinking about this. Because let's say, if you were to use the image of a woman starts, making all of these comments to you, and you're somewhat attracted to her or whatever, you think that she's beautiful or whatever, and she starts making all of these comments, in the typical straight male's mind, it's not that big of a deal. But now let's change it around a little bit. Now let's say a male colleague is the one making those comments to you. You may think, this guy works out at the gym all the time. You have no sexual interest in him whatsoever. You just recognize that there's like this guy's awesome, cool, whatever. But he's the one who's making those advances, or he's the one who's making those comments. He's the ones who maybe occasionally, kind of just accidentally kind of brushes up against your crotch or whatever. And just these things that just make you kind of feel, ew, yuck, what's going on here? That's the feeling that a lot of women go through. Women may not necessarily. They may think that you are attractive. They may like you in many, many ways. But they may not have any sort of sexual interest in you whatsoever. And so, to think, the straight male being hit on by a gay male is essentially the straight woman being hit on by the straight man.
But you can do it the other way around. Like, imagine you have a female boss,
mm-hmm.
and you're happily married.
Yes.
And your female boss comes up and says, "Hey, why don't we go out for a drink tonight? I want to talk to you about such and such after work." Not a big deal, right? Like, okay. You go, and the next thing you know, she's, reaching across the table, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it starts out as a work thing, and then it becomes, and you have no intention of cheating on your wife.
Yeah.
You're completely uncomfortable, and she's made it like you don't really have an option.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like. And then you sit there and you're like, what do I do? Oh my God, do I go? And worse if you're single, because if you don't have an out, like, you can say, look, I'm not messing around on my wife. But if you're single, when I was single for a long time in my
mm-hmm.
corporate world life, and you just don't, it's so normal. It was so normal. Like, we would talk about it. Like, I remember my best friend, I'd be like, I can't even believe he freaking does this stuff. How does he get away with it? When we get together now, we're like, oh, if that was today, he would have been fired in like 2 seconds.
Right.
But not one of us ever said anything.
And, Lori, the example that you use, it exists, but is not common enough for men to be able to really be able to relate to it. I mean, they can perhaps imagine themselves in that situation and it being very, very awkward, but it's hard because there aren't as many women in power who potentially could hold that, their position.
Right.
And it's still the distorted.
I never want women to get like that.
Uncomfortable. Exactly. How uncomfortable does it feel? How uncomfortable does it feel? That's really what we're trying to get at here.
And plenty of the same culture. A man in that situation, like, great, my boss wants to sleep with me. She's hot. Great. Just like, the female teacher that seduces a minor boy, that kid's celebrated. But if it's reversed, oh my God, lock her up, lock that guy up.
And it shouldn't be celebrated either way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but it is. Or it is to some extent.
Another article I read today I thought was really good was a guy goes, he trains the armed forces, and he goes in and he puts the male symbol on one side of the board and a female symbol on the other side of the whiteboard, and he asks the men what they do to prevent sexual attacks. And the men just, one guy, like, there's always the one response, don't go to prison. That's the response from the male side. How do you prevent sexual attacks on yourself? And then he goes, okay, women, how do you do it? And then the board is just filled up with all the different things that they do, that we do every day, all the time, without thinking about it, because we've been trained that we need to prevent it. Every single day. That's the biggest. We live, and I will say all women do this. We live constantly with what's our responsibility to make sure we don't get attacked? So, simple as you always have the keys in your hand with the keys facing out, right? When you walk in the parking lot, you park under a light all the time. You never get in your car without checking the back seat. When you're with friends, you never ever leave until they drive away too. So all the things, right? You do everything together. You don't go out to a club by yourself. You go with your friends. You make sure you leave with your friends. All these things that are so innate in our lives are all there because we don't feel safe. And then guys go, I don't understand. Why are you being so protective? What's the problem? And it's like, are you kidding? If we don't and something happens, then we're like, what were you doing out by yourself at a bar? Why were you at a club? Why were you out drinking? What were you thinking, right? So all those things, it's an every minute, every day kind of thing that we carry and do automatically. That I don't think men even think about, except that we do it because you guys were the predators. Sorry,
so
I'm not saying specifically.
So to take it back to the workplace, where it's there are laws and everyone should feel safe and should just feel safe. Period. At work, what can a man do who is not a sexual predator and is horrified that this kind of thing has been happening to so many women? What can he do?
Speak.
I'm losing you.
Sorry, am I lost again? Am I back?
You're back.
No, Andy, you broke up. I didn't hear you.
Oh, all right. Let me take it again then. To take it back to work for a man who is not a sexual predator, what can he do to support women?
So anytime you see it, say something.
To the woman, to the man, who?
To the man.
So men confronting men that this is not okay would make it a safer place for everybody.
Yep. And make sure the woman knows too that that she can count on you to be like, that's not cool. If you have an issue, you can talk to me. I'll go to HR with you. I'll do whatever. She might not want to, like you can't force somebody to do it, but let them know, like, I have your back. It's sort of like, it's so similar to the white privilege thing, right? So white privilege is for women and men that are white, but this white privilege, white male privilege is for, is for men. When the Muslim ban was going on and people said wear the safety pins so that someone would know that you've got their back if something happens. Things like that. Maybe there'll be some other movement for the women. I would love to see it that says, like, hey, if you witness it, if you feel afraid, if you feel unsafe, I'm going to have this, I'm wearing something that says, you can come and I'll help you. Or you can stand by me, I'll make sure that you're safe. I'm not going to let anyone grab you. We don't innately, we won't, like, if we're being harassed by someone, we're not going to go to another guy and talk to him about it.
Yeah.
Because we don't trust that it's going to matter. So start to say it matters. Yeah. That's going to be the biggest thing. Create if you're in the corporate world, create a diversity program there. Have a conversation and say, hey, I'd like to can we bring someone in who specializes in rape culture? There's women and men out there who teach it, to help us so that we know what to look for and what not to look for. We know what to do. If I think I'm saying, like, there's a big difference between, I used to go out and party with some of the people I worked with and we would have a good time, but firstly, it was co-workers. It wasn't bosses so much. And there wasn't, there was no sexual stuff going on. So you want to have, you want to have that, you want to be able to have a relationship with the people you work with, right? You want to be able to go out and have a drink with them or whatever, go out to lunch with them. But if you don't feel safe, that's not pleasant. It's not a good feeling to not, to not feel safe. I remember walking down the hall. I had lost a bunch of weight, and I remember walking down the hall, and I was wearing a dress, and one of the guys I worked with just walked right up to me, and I don't think he meant anything sexual by it. I'd like to think he didn't, but he walked right up to me and put his hands around my waist and went, "Wow, you got so little." I'm thinking that really wasn't appropriate, and I know it wasn't because I got all egged out. So we had, but he didn't he wasn't groping me. I think he was trying to make a compliment. It's a lot easier to just go, "Wow, you lost weight, you look good." That doesn't necessarily, that's very different from, as he's walking down the hall, he reaches out and grabs me by the waist to tell me how little I got. That is kind of, right? So it's not about not having relationships with people that you work with. It's about figuring out where it's appropriate and where it isn't. What can you say, what can't you say? And some of it is going to be who you are, right? Like, I was very used to crude talk. I mean, I have 5 brothers, like I said. So when I used to hang out with the guys I worked with after work on a Friday night, and we would hang out and have a couple of beers, sometimes they would say things that were like, "Ooh." And what I always would say to them is, like, if it went over the line, I would very calmly, and this was coworkers, not bosses, I would go, "Yeah, that's over the line. We got to change the subject." And they always honored it. So the problem would have been if they stopped honoring it.
And the problem also be if you weren't comfortable enough to speak up and set that line too.
Right.
So on all parties, right, silence is
a problem.
permission, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And silence born out of fear, especially.
Right.
Exactly.
So one of the benefits was it was co-workers, it wasn't bosses.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a boss making that comment. It was just a guy, it was a coworker and not a boss. So I think that makes a big difference. And very rarely would the bosses come and drink with us. They just wouldn't. And I think for that very reason. Like the other place I worked was a lot more reasonable with that stuff. It wasn't quite the abuse wasn't so bad there at the other company I worked for. Compared to the bank. The bank was brutal. I mean, it was just notoriously awful.
Yeah, I've read that, financial, entertainment are some of the top fields where this is. And again, power, money is power, fame is power. So
right.
At those upper echelons of someone feeling so powerful, invincible, that I will use,
Right.
And so I want to get to this point because I opened this show kind of confessing. I'm not sure what sexual harassment is. There does need to be some education. So I looked it up, and I've got the government's definition of sexual harassment. So it is unlawful to harass a person, an applicant or employee, because of that person's sex. Harassment can include sexual harassment, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. Harassment does not have to be of a sexual nature, however. It can include offensive remarks about a person's sex. For example, it is illegal to harass a woman by making offensive comments about women in general. I had no idea that it was that specific. Both the victim and the harasser can either be a woman or a man, and the victim and harasser can be the same sex. Now, this is part that helps me grasp it too. So although the law doesn't prohibit simple teasing, offhand comments, or isolated incidents that are not very serious, harassment is illegal when it is so frequent or severe that it creates a hostile or offensive work environment. So again, so my perspective, so locker room talk isn't illegal, but if someone says, hey, like you pointed out to the people you with, Lori, that, hey, you're going too far. That's not appropriate here. Hey, cut it out. If people cut it out, it's no harm, no foul.
Right.
Right. So it's when people go beyond it. I don't even know how to phrase this, because again, some women are already fearful, so they don't speak up. So that is, I can see the predator going, no, like Harvey Weinstein is saying it was all consensual because no one punched him in the face or kicked him in the balls to get away. So in his mind, it's consensual. So how can we get around that? And I guess this is the big work of generations and conversations, but how can we empower everyone to speak up?
I think the problem with, like, in a lot of jobs, in most jobs actually, it's not, if you read the bylaws of the company and stuff, they'll tell you that bosses can't be in relationships with their with their people they manage, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, right? You can't be.
I was going to use the word underlings, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you can't, and the reason for that is for the very reason that, firstly, there's favoritism if you're involved with the boss, right? There's like a million things, and if you don't feel confident to say no, if you're not comfortable enough to say no to their advances, you end up in the Harvey Weinstein situation. Like, he's got all this power. So they specifically make it so that, look, when you're in that role, when you have all the power, you can't be in a relationship with someone who doesn't. It's just not, it's not effective. It's not fair. And especially when it's not a relationship, when it's just sex. Like, right. He knew exactly what he was doing. Like, so my feeling is, like, for people, like, when you don't know, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I'm telling you, when you invite someone up to a viewing of a movie and you're the only one there and you're in a bathrobe with a bottle of champagne, you knew exactly what you were doing, right? And it's the same thing. Like, when you're a predator, you know when you're being a predator.
Right. It's these extreme cases are obvious. It's
right.
It's everything that leads those to happening that is where the work is.
So, right. And some of that is, like, if you're not sure as a man, if you're doing something appropriate or inappropriate, ask the person. Ask them. Like, if you're wondering, like, hey, you know what? If I just said that, wow, was that, like, not cool? Turn around and say, hey, I know you didn't say anything, but was that not cool? Did that make you feel uncomfortable? Because I realized after I said it that maybe that wasn't so cool.
And that the problem, like, that's more the enlightened, awoken male can do that.
And that's
I imagine the predator folks you rebuff them, and that fragile, scared little boy, whatever is inside them, comes back hitting harder and does all the repercussions and does destroy your life. And
so
predators are not just predators; they're bullies as well.
Right. So what you asked was, what do we do in the workforce? So in the workforce, if those are a little bit uncomfortable yourselves, to ask, like, what is appropriate, what isn't, what do you like, what don't you, then you can maybe stop the next person over. Like, if you ask the women that you work with, hey, if I say this, or if I send out this meme that has whatever, or this joke, if it's not appropriate, will you tell me? Like, just put it out there. If this offends you, if you think this isn't appropriate, will you tell me so that I don't do it again? Because a lot of times we're not going to say anything, right? Like, I was comfortable with the guys that I worked with, but I worked with them for years, okay? But there were other women that would never go to drink because they weren't comfortable enough to say something. And that's where, again, you lose out on hanging out with people that you work with and maybe being able to get a promotion later because you know them and you want to transfer into their department, right? Like, all those things come into play, right? It's sort of like playing golf, and women weren't allowed on the golf course back in the day, right? It was the men's thing. And so the men would make all the deals on the golf course and women never had a shot. And it can happen in the workplace the same way, because women don't feel comfortable, so they don't go to an after work event. They avoid them So the goal is for men to ask, just ask, what can we do to make you feel comfortable and safe? Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, well, they should just feel that way. Well, we don't always. We don't want to be rude. We don't want to mess you up. God forbid your feelings should get hurt.
So hopefully this whole, the Me Too sweeping, every man seeing and maybe discovering friends and family members have been felt victimized by harassment is going to wake more people up. So that seems to be the biggest thing men could do. Speak up. Tell someone that's not cool.
And
we talked earlier, we mentioned earlier some different ways to empathize and kind of visualization and ways to see this. Have you guys heard of the rock test? So some woman shared this and it went kind of viral, but if you're not sure what sexual harassment is, this is the rock test. Treat all women like you would treat Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And that was it. But now, to me, like, The Rock is pretty objectified. Like, if I was a person with The Rock, I'd go touch him too. Like, he's objectified to me. So it doesn't really work as much to me as I thought of that. So what I think is the ultimate test, imagine whatever you are doing or considering doing is being done to your mother, to your partner, to your sister, to your daughter. Would you be upset? If yes, stop. Right? Harvey Weinstein was married. What would he think about his wife going to someone's hotel room to talk about a new script and the guy answers in his bathrobe and suggests a massage? I think he'd be upset.
That would probably be an entirely other show about, just how we process stuff. But yeah, no, it's a good starting point, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think the biggest thing for the Me Too is for men to realize just how prevalent it is, and then say, "Oh my God, have I been part of it?"
Yeah.
And how do I stop being part of it?
Right, and again, I know I can't imagine there is an American white male that hasn't been part of it, because it's part of the culture. Unless you grew up in a cave, like if you went to a public anything, some of this is going to rub off, and
and that's why we call it rape culture, right?
Yeah.
So it really is this whole culture of women being second-class citizens, that like we just don't matter the same way. And so it's
right.
I mean, it just is like it's we're always taught, right? Like the nail polish, you can wear the certain nail polish to put in your drink if you've been at a bar, and the nail polish will change color if they put a roofie in it, right? Like somebody created that. And it's like, well, wouldn't it be nice if they could just create a class where they could teach men not to friggin' rape women?
Yeah. Right,
like exactly. There's a concept, right? But again, it's one more tool that a woman is supposed to use to prevent men from harming her. Right?
Here's something that I want to touch.
That's rape culture. That is rape culture. Yeah. I'm going to let me teach you self-defense. Well, if you didn't take self-defense, if you don't carry mace, if you don't do this, then aren't you kind of responsible for getting raped if you're out and about? Right? That's rape culture. All those things. So, of course, women don't come forward. Yeah. And then when they do, they get annihilated and not believed. I mean, look at Clarence Thomas, right? When Anita Hill came forward and said everything. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I do.
If you guys remember when, yeah. So that was the same thing, right? Like, well, why didn't she come forward when it happened? Well, because she would have lost her job. And she was, I had a boss tell me I couldn't have a promotion. I was single, not dating, nothing. And a boss told me that he couldn't promote me because I might meet someone and get married, and they might get a job far away, and I would have to quit my job and move with him.
Okay. My mom had somebody tell her that once also. Yeah.
That's sexual harassment, right? I literally did not get a job because I might someday get married. And when I worked at the bank, every time a man got engaged or married, he got a promotion. Every single time. Did not happen for women.
Mm-hmm.
But everything, because then they're more committed to work. Like that's what you.
I'd like to toss something in here really quick. And that is, as far as, solutions, is there a solution? Sure. Is it one solution? Probably not. But there are so many, like, the pyramids were built out of 2 million, blocks. So the solutions are going to ultimately end up being individual. But a good starting point, at least from my perspective, is stop blaming. Stop justifying. Stop blaming women. Stop blaming biology. Stop claiming that, it's because, we have these sexual urges and we're just trying, it dates back to our evolutionary, how we evolved or whatever. Stop justifying. Stop blaming. And just saying, this is not acceptable for me. And if I see it, I will say something. I will not say that, I will not say, blaming or pointing the finger or justifying or saying you're wrong or anything like that. It's like, you know what? I personally don't feel comfortable hearing that.
Right.
I don't think that's right. And put it on yourself and stick it to yourself. It does not take a majority to change minds.
Right.
But it takes enough people making that decision and speaking up.
Yeah, you have to say something.
Yes, silence is tacit approval, and it goes for men and women.
Right.
So women, hopefully this change makes women feel safer, more empowered to speak up initially, right? But about anything, about anyone, wherever they are, if it's the guy running a car wash or if it's the president of the United States, like ideally it doesn't matter, and they can be believed, but and it's up for men to speak up when you see harassment. Say something, confront it. Doesn't mean you have to get violent. You don't have to be Superman. Just hey, I see what's going on here. It's not cool. Cut it out.
Right.
Or let a woman know that I saw that, or like we're not all like that. I'm sorry. How can I support you? But so open conversation, break the vows of silence, and as you were saying, Lord, ask.
Yeah.
I've gone far. I've said multiple, I don't know what this means. I don't know what I can do anymore. And I know some guys are feeling that, and I encourage them to voice that frustration as opposed to I don't know what to do anymore, so I'm just going to freaking rape everybody. I don't want that to be anyone's reaction.
But and you're going to get different answers, right? Because some women are going to be like, I don't want you touching me. I don't want this. I don't want that. And other women are going to say, this is where I draw the line. And so, it's not all going to be the same. Mm-hmm. And that's okay too. Yeah. What's acceptable for one woman might not be acceptable for another. And especially if somebody's come from a story of a history of abuse, right? So someone who's been raped and sexually assaulted and all sorts of things, their level of what they're willing to put up with might be very different than someone who didn't come from that. So it's really honoring each person. And so it's work. Yeah. But you're going to have, the whole thing is, friggin' we're worth it. As a humanity, we're worth the work, and we're worth the effort of making everybody safer. Right. And I don't, women shouldn't have to feel like we have to be the guardians of every man's actions. Right. That's a huge responsibility for women. And we've lived it our whole lives. I read an article today and it was just called Tired. We're tired of trying to figure out what you mean when you do this. Was that abusive? Was it not? How did we play into it? What was our responsibility? I mean, we're tired. We're tired of it. And we've been taught it from the time we were little. When the little boy hits you and the people go, oh, it's because he likes you. I mean, when you hear that, and then you go, why do women stay with men who beat them? Oh, because they're taught when they were 5 that when someone hits you, it means they like you. How screwed up is that? Right? So those things, like constantly, like it teaches women from the get-go that we have to figure out what your actions actually mean.
Yeah, and
instead of men using their voices and telling us what they actually feel and mean.
Right. And so this, I'm gonna, we're gonna wrap this up, but I would close again with the invitation. If your behavior happening to someone that you love would upset you, then that's the big clue that your behavior is not appropriate, right? I think that's kind of the simplest way to do it, as we're all figuring out what that means, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So I doubt we solved the world's problems this evening, but I do know that
good conversation.
Right. I know this conversation leads to others having conversations, and that's where healing, that's where growth, that's where everybody getting along, that's where everybody feeling safe and empowered. That's the smallest solution. That's the beginning of our pyramid, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hugely important to be able to talk about it, right? Because we've always been taught not to. Because it makes people uncomfortable. Like when you start talking about somebody who reached over and groped you when you were 8 years old, or 10 years old, or 12 years old. When you start talking about that stuff, people feel uncomfortable. And when you say it keeps happening, and it kept happening, and it was the neighborhood kid that everybody liked, and it was this one's father who everybody liked, and it was that one's older brother, and this, so it's not comfortable. But if you can sit with the discomfort, then you give women more and more of an opportunity to share, and you teach us and you teach yourselves that it's not okay. Like we can share. We don't need to be ashamed that stuff happened. It doesn't need to be a surprise.
Yeah, and shame keeps people quiet. Shame keeps the silence. So yeah, there's nothing to be ashamed of. And that's, like, again, we're finding out harassment is happening to everybody. So it's really nothing to be freaking ashamed of. It's like,
right.
Wow, I don't know. Ideally, it doesn't become such a constant, habitual, every day, every second in America, this is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've read today, like, so many women, like, were talking to their husbands, and their husbands had no idea that they had experiences like they had.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like, so you're not even telling. See, so that's what I mean. Like, we're not even telling the people that we're closest to, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, no, I didn't like when that happened. Right. Oh, that was an icky feeling.
These are conversations that enough people aren't having. And that's, again, the beauty of, when a celebrity comes forward and gets the media attention, it lets all these conversations at home happen. So that's the, I'm glad Harvey Weinstein decided to go forward and has sacrificed himself. Unfortunately, it took freaking decades of his abuse to get us to this point where people are talking about it.
Well,
but
he came forward. Women came forward.
Yeah, I should say, but yeah.
Women came forward and said, "I've had enough."
Yeah.
Right, and how many of them had to before it was believed? That's the most frustrating.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that's what shows up for him and really for Bill Cosby too. But cool. Let's wrap this up. Thank you, Lori, for joining us tonight, giving so much of your insight and experiences. Thank you, Appio, for all of your insights and experiences as well. Thanks everyone for tuning in, for listening. Let us know what you thought about this, and we'll talk to you again soon. Be well.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Until next time, visit realmenfeel.org, join the Real Men Feel group on Facebook, and share what you thought of this show. Please give this podcast a review on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you are discovering Real Men Feel. Reach out to us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Learn more about Andy Grant at theandygrant.com and Appio Hunter at appiohunter.com.